News as Ted Turner has passed away at the age of 87, an iconic businessman, philanthropist, a force of nature in the city of Atlanta. So much of what the city is today is because of the work of Ted Turner. Joining us is Bob Hope, the former director of public relations and promotions for the Atlanta Braves in the 1970s, a key figure during the team's early years under Ted Turner. We really appreciate the time as we look back at a tremendous life and legacy of Mr. Turner. Thanks for the time, Mr. Hope.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you.
Wow, it's hard to even know where to start when you look at kind of the totality of what he did in his life and even just for the city of Atlanta. When you first heard of his passing, where did your mind and heart go to first?
Well, the first thing I did actually was call Ruby Lucas, who's Bill Lucas's widow, and Bill was the first African-American general manager in Major League Baseball. And then I called Billy Aaron, Hank Aaron's widow, just because I knew those two were probably not having a great day. Both of them were sobbing when I called, but it's you knew it was coming. I mean, he hasn't been doing well for a good long while, but you also think back about the Ted Turner. I knew Ted Turner before I guess the world had heard of Ted Turner, and during that process of his becoming nationally known, internationally known, and he had such incredible bravado. He was Alexander the Great, who was going to take over the world through communication. And he just, that was so refreshing. And he also, regardless of how many times he would surprise you, there were always more surprises. So it was, I think I just realized how much I missed that. And also, by the way, how blessed I was to ever have been around it.
I'm so glad you mentioned Billy Aaron and Hank Aaron. I think as people think back to the Braves, you can't think about the Braves without thinking about Hank Aaron or Ted Turner. Talk about their relationship since they were together in those incredible times with Hank Aaron, breaking the record and having such a deeper significance here in the city, here in the cradle of the civil rights movement as well.
No, that was a special relationship. I mean, first of all, they're two people that truly believe that everyone should get along. I mean, Ted's statement when he was starting CNN is he wanted to be the facilitator of everyone in the world understanding different positions. One man's terrorist, another man's freedom fighter. And then Hank also was probably as gracious a human being. I mean, Hank kept the poem If, was his favorite poem from Rudyard Kipling. So if you can keep your head when all about your losing theirs and blaming on you, it's, just talking about the how you treat other people. So the two of them really had very, very common philosophies, but also I think Ted was a little peeved when he bought the Braves that the former ownership had traded Hank away. So Ted brought him back into the office, and Ted and Hank became a really integral part in building the Braves to what they are now.
There's that famous, stories of him driving his Toyota to the ballpark. Talk about this kind of juxtaposition as you were talking about this kind of larger than life figure, but then somebody who seems so approachable and would drive his Toyota to the ballpark.
No, one time Bill Lucas, who was the general manager of the team, had a stroke and died, and I went to the hospital when he was still in a coma, and Ted was there, and I remember Ted driving out in front of me in the parking lot, and the parking attendant said, "You know who that was?" And I said, "Who?" He said, "It was Ted Turner." I said, "Can you believe he drives a Toyota?" And Ted, by the way, is one of these rare people who not really concerned with the thoughts of people around him. He's not trying to impress other people. He's just focused on doing things the way he feels like they should be done. He always was reasonably frugal in that way. I mean, when I was there, and I was there during an interesting time because we had the Braves and we had the Hawks and we had TV. So I was the promoter and publicist for all three for the time I was there. Yeah, but there were only two firing offenses that you automatically would be fired. One is if you were caught smoking, and the other is if you were caught drinking out of a styrofoam cup. So Ted was always concerned about the world's environment.
also ahead of his time in that regard as a conservationist and an
Oh yeah.
environmentalist, for sure.
No, I mean, there were so many good things he did. I mean, he led a fairly flamboyant life. Not a lot of people. We'd go to dinner during the time he was trying to date Jane Fonda. He was like a 15-year-old boy calling. He'd always thought she was beautiful. Scott Sassa, who was the West Coast guy um, for the Turner um, companies, got Jane Fonda's home number. So Ted had called her a few times, and she wouldn't go out with him. And we'd sit there, and he'd say, "No, what do you think? What do you think? Think I keep trying?" And then he'd stop, and he said, "Well, after a while, who else is going to call and ask Jane Fonda out on a date? So sooner or later, I'm her only choice." Then he would talk about their first dates and all that. He just was, you think, well, who else would have that type of uh, rambunctiousness, bravado, that they just sort of jump in and do these things that Ted would do. Ted would try anything. And by the way, if what he tried didn't work, he'd just go on to something else.
I guess that's the mark of a true visionary and a true leader. You have to have the courage to try things, and his yacht was called Courageous after all. And I was thinking as you're telling the story about Jane Fonda, whether it was this people thought at the time a crazy idea of doing a 24-hour news network to, you know, competing in the America's Cup with his yacht or asking Jane Fonda out. I've read that he did best when he knew the odds were against him. Did you find that to be true, knowing him so
Well,
well?
we used to say all the time if things were going too smooth, if it was that he would figure out a way to disrupt them, to create a crisis. So we'd, you know, it just think, that's when we grew. The energy went up when that type of thing happened. But he was just bold, and he was always trying something new. If he heard an idea, I don't think he ever heard a bad idea, particularly if somebody outside the company came in with it. And we try some things, but it all, one of the, we announced one time, had a big press conference to announce he was going to do a, a what a competitive network to HBO. It would be a pay channel, and they do the same thing HBO did. Well, we announced it, and then he got into it, and it was clear it wasn't going to work. So we just never announced he wasn't going to do it. We just went on to something else. He didn't, nothing seemed to perturb him. He just was going to stay after it till he got things done.
It's pretty impressive. We were trying to just touch on the highlights of his business through sports and philanthropy and media, and in 5 minutes you can't really cover what we would consider our highlights. But knowing him the way you knew him, were there a few things that meant the most to him personally, of all the accomplishments, of all the endeavors?
Well, I think obviously CNN meant an awful lot to him. I mean, the sports teams meant to him, but I think the biggest thing with Ted was just doing good. The $1 billion he gave to the, start the UN Foundation, just the ability to do good around the world. His efforts with the Goodwill Games, when uh, Russia and the U.S. were, Russia was boycotting the Olympics, and you couldn't get the two together. He was going to figure out how to solve that. I mean, he really had this sense of boldness that he was going to do things, and it really had nothing to do. I mean, the Goodwill Games were going to lose a lot of money, and it never really money wasn't his primary motivator. Clearly, money was necessary to do all the bold things that he wanted to do, but he just he was out to I say save the world. One time he was in New York. When I was up there, I was supposed to get a speaker to come and speak to our employees. We had like 800 people in the building, and they asked me if I could get Ted Turner to come. I don't know, I'll ask him. So I called him up, and he said, "Well, it'll help you out." Oh yeah, it'll help me out. Well, there was a little bit of consternation because he had just gone down to visit with Castro, and people were concerned about him representing the U.S. in places like that. So we had this huge crowd in there. And finally, after any, it really was a delightful speaker. But at the end of the speech, we had Q&A, and somebody asked him, said, "Mr. Turner, who do you think you are going to visit with Fidel Castro representing the U.S.?" And Ted looked at him. He said, "Well, I know who I am." He said, "I'm a broadcaster. I'm not the biggest broadcaster, but I'm a broadcaster. That's what I do for a living. However, my hobby is world peace." I wish everybody had that hobby. So it was delightfully refreshing in the way he approached the world.
Wow, his hobby was world peace, and he put $1 billion to back it up. That's so impressive. You know, we talk so much about a lot of the city of Atlanta we know today is because of the efforts of Ted Turner. But so many people have moved into the city maybe in the last 10, 20 years. What do you see around us today that would not be what it is without his efforts so many years ago?
I'm going to, this is fairly subjective. I'm going to start out by saying Ted instilled an attitude in the city. And the attitude was somewhat, it's can do. We're going to do things. We're going to do them right. And then, he also, when they were talking about building what's now Phillips Arena, or not Phillips Arena, now State Farm Arena, uh, out in the suburbs, he was not going to stand for that. He wanted the core of Atlanta to be where the action was. And he was very much a believer in the city of Atlanta and doing things that were right for the city. And I think that that philosophy permeated the Chamber of Commerce, the civic leadership, and all. And even the ones that thought Ted was a little outrageous appreciated the courage he had of focusing on building the city of Atlanta into what we all would want it to be.
I know he battled illness for many years at the end of his life, of course, making that announcement publicly in 2018. Do you remember those, like maybe the last conversations you had with him? Anything like stick with you as you think of him passing?
Well, I mean, it's interesting as his Lewy body syndrome kicked in and the dementia that goes with it. He, people that have dementia sometimes can light up and remember things and have great conversations. Well, a few times I was with him, we'd sit down and I got the impression that our crazy promotions that we did a long time ago and the nuttiness of things we did was a simpler time. And he always seemed to enjoy talking about those, and he'd light up, and sometimes people who are around us who weren't around at that time would look at us like, you guys are nuts, you did all that stuff. But then, you know, other thing, I think the thing that well, there are a few things that impressed me most. One is the chemistry between him and Jane Fonda. Jane would say that he was the best of all her former husbands and that type of thing. But when the two of them together, it didn't matter whether he had dementia or not. They just kind of lit up, and I remember how cool that was. And he just, he, I did have the pleasure, and I was scared to death actually, of interviewing him. This is before they knew he had Lewy body syndrome, on stage at the Atlanta Rotary Club, and they had called me up and said, "Bob, would you introduce Ted Turner? He's going to speak." And I said, "Look, I'll introduce Ted Turner if he wants me to introduce him, but I'm not going to surprise him." And so they called me back and said, "Well, what he really liked to do is he'd really like for you to interview him on stage." And I thought, oh my gosh, because we used to always say there are three things you can count on with Ted. He'll inform you, he'll entertain you, and he'll embarrass you. And the third one bothered me. But we just had the most delightful conversation, just thinking about things that we'd done in the past. One of the things is one of my, he would let me do anything. I mean, very few people who are young, I was in my 20s, ever had a boss who would just let them do whatever. I mean, it was like, I never had a bad idea in his mind, as crazy as some of them were. Well, one Braves game, we decided, we tried to have a promotion every night, and our philosophy was we didn't know if people would come, but we had to be there, so we wanted to entertain ourselves. But we decided we were going to do a baseball Olympics, and the baseball Olympics would be the Phillies team and the Braves team competing with things you can do, throw in a barrel with a baseball. Well, one of them was to have a race between a Phillies player and a Braves player to home plate, pushing a baseball with their nose. And Tug McGraw was a Phillies player, and he agreed to do it. And the Braves players always great. They came up and said, "Bob, this really hurts. We just can't do this. It hurts our nose. It's the ball. Has laces in it, and has all the stitches, and the ground's gritty." And they said it hurts to do that. So I remember we got to a point that I did the only thing that seemed logical at the time. I sent somebody up to the stadium club to get Ted, but Ted was having dinner with Jesse Jackson. I knew that. And I said, "Get Ted down here." And Ted comes down and he said, "What do you need?" And I said, "I want you to go put on your uniform." And he had his own uniform. He comes out and he said, "What do you want me to do?" And I said, "I want you to go at third base, and I want you to race Tug McGraw pushing a baseball with your nose." And I'm talking to him on stage. I said, "Well, Ted, I always wondered, why'd you do that?" And he said, Well, you told me to. I thought, well, that's true. That's why I did. We just got to a point. He'd just do whatever you want him to do.
That's incredible. That's an incredible story. I think of talk about well your influence, but his influence too to have these ideas, to be able to do that, to have so much fun. I'm thinking, wow, he's a visionary. That'd been like 10 million views on YouTube these
Well,
days,
he would do
something
those
like
things.
that.
We promoted that Ted was going to race ostriches against the media and all. And I found you could get ostrich come in to race pretty inexpensively. And so we promoted that, and we had people come in. They were going to watch Ted Turner race an ostrich, but Ted came to me beforehand, and you were actually in a little sulky type thing behind the ostrich that the ostrich would pull. Ted came. He said, "Oh, this is false advertising. You said I was going to race an ostrich." I said, "Well, yeah, race." Well, I thought I was going to have a saddle on the back of the. No, that's not the way it is. And then finally, I calmed him down, talked him into it, and I said, "And by the way, look, we have racing silks for you." I called Churchill Downs, and they made racing silks for everybody. And so I pulled them out. He just lit up. He liked it, and then I turned it around, and I had nicknames on the back, and I had Teddy Ballgame on the back of his. And he said, "Oh, that's demeaning. That's insulting." I said, "What?" He said, "Nobody calls me that." I said, "Well, we do around the office sometimes." And so he grabbed them and he went up to his office, and I went up. I thought, well, I hope he's still doing it, to see how he's doing. We had found a razor blade, and he was cutting the letters off, and he glued back on Ted. He on the back of it. I thought, just he. I mean, there was no limit to how often he could surprise you.
What an incredible life. I have to tell you, it just meant so much to hear your stories. Thank you for sharing them. I feel like I've gotten to know him a lot better through your stories. And I just want to tell you, we're thinking about you. I know this is a loss. He's been a big part of your life as well. So for you to take the time to join us today to tell those stories really means a lot. Thank you so much for the
Well,
time.
thank you so much. Now I know he was a wonderful boss. I can tell you that.
Well, the city has a lot to be grateful for and beyond. And his philanthropy continues, and his can do attitude is still felt in our city every day. Bob Hope, thanks so much.
Absolutely.